right. Gaza War, day 278. I would say no end in sight. Um, there are negotiations ongoing, and the Hamas representative, I saw a summary from a Hamas representative who said it's too early to talk about optimism or pessimism in the negotiations. So I don't know. I guess if it's too early to talk about pessimism, that can't be bad. Nonetheless, I'm going to continue with no end in sight. Hamas reiterated their negotiating positions, the same things they've always been saying. They want their prisoners back. They want reconstruction. They want complete withdrawal and a complete cessation of hostilities. They want the ceasefire to be a ceasefire, in other words. And they point out that it's Netanyahu who's preventing the deal. You may have seen one of the ministers holding up a picture of Yahya Sinwar. There's a lot of Israeli political figures that hold up pictures of Yahya Sinwar, and I'm not sure it's having the effect they intend. I guess they're only playing to their own base. Let's go to the fronts. In Gaza, Israel has dropped leaflets saying to the people of Gaza City, the whole north, to evacuate the north. They've already done that. They wanted the north to be evacuated long since. The resistance actually has said, made a statement to the people of the north saying, beware, don't listen to this. There is no place safe in Gaza. If you do have to move because of imminent danger, they're saying move somewhere close and stay close and move back to where you were after the danger has passed. And remember, there's nowhere in Gaza that's safe. It's just another part of the war against civilians. It's another depravity, just continuously trying to get people to move from one place to another. I'm sure there's some sadistic pleasure in all of this, and sadistic pleasure does seem to be one of the major end ends goals of this campaign at this point, and it seems to be one of the only achievable goals that they have. There are other horrific things that you may have seen. The Israelis are writing numbers on the wrists of aid truck drivers. So people have made the obvious connections with historical parallels that come up in that regard. But we also have resistance. We also have resistance, unbelievably fierce resistance to report in the north as well as everywhere else. We have in Gaza City, the Tel Al Hawa neighborhood in particular in Gaza City, we have reports of mortars, so-called television devices. These are anti-personnel grenade explosive devices. John Elmer has outlined and detailed them on the Electronic Intifada live stream resistance reports before. Tell how there's snipers with videos. There's a field report of an attack on two Merkava tanks with one Yasin 105 rocket shoulder launched anti-tank weapon and two ground Shoath explosives. You know, those heavy ones that you see them carry with the copper shaped charge, just very destructive weapon, anti-armor weapon. They also had attacked a D9 bulldozer with a pre-prepared Asif explosive, which was unveiled relatively recently during the war. There was shelling in Al Mintar in Shujaiyya yesterday. There's also reports that the Israelis have withdrawn from Shujaiyya after 2 weeks of fighting. So Shujaiyya again has ultimately repelled the Israelis the way they did in 2014. They were trying to avoid Shujaiyya, this invasion, and ultimately, after a 2 week battle, the Israelis have withdrawn from Shujaiyya yet again. They're still shelling, they're still attacking aerially, but the ground forces have all withdrawn from Shujaiyya, as we could have predicted that they would. There have been a number of what the Israelis have called major incidents in and around Gaza City, including Shujaiyya and Tel El Hawa, where they've lost troops and had helicopters doing the medivacs, the medical evacuations. There's a particularly dramatic moment where there's a resistance sniper in a video. I'm sure John will share this one when he comes back. Sorry, you guys missed. I know you missed Nora and John, but you had the wonderful Rania Kalik and Ali and Asa on the Electronic Intifada live stream today. But Nora and John will be back next week, and I'll try to get John back on this channel as well. So this quote from the sniper says something like, "I've been looking for Yair Netanyahu for a while so that I can put a bullet in his head, but my search seems to be in vain. Of course, Netanyahu won't send his son into this hell, but he sent these idiots, so they deserve it." And then he proceeds to snipe a soldier, an Israeli officer. It's all in the video, so you can see that. There's reports of fierce clashes in the Netzarim corridor. Remember, this is the road that the Israelis have set to try to divide Gaza City from the rest, north from south. And what they've done as a result is present a huge target for the resistance, and they've come under continuous fire from the resistance in the Netzarim corridor. And in Rafah, there's also huge. I mean, the resistance reports that the largest operation they've done during Al-Aqsa flood has taken place, and there's a video of it. It's about 3 minutes long. It's a raid on a fortified operations headquarters in Tal Zorob, which is southeast of Tal al-Sultan in Rafah. So while all of this fighting is going on in Shujaiyya, while all this stuff is happening, there is also this battle, this huge raid that happened on this fortified base. So I'm actually going to try to play it in the background while I talk. Let's see how that goes. I'll just I'm not going to try to show you the whole thing or anything, but it is a remarkable video because they show the surveillance, they show them getting into position, they show the headquarters, the building they're targeting. And so this is all surveillance. They show themselves staging. They're staging the operation, getting ready to do it on their phones. Then they show themselves getting into position. They show the sniper getting into position. But I want to show you. They show the armor, the anti-armor people get. But I wanted to show you how you've seen the red arrows over the armored vehicles, but this is they have the red arrow over the actual headquarters that they're targeting for the raid. So just the biggest operation that they've done so far, they say, and really, and they've of course made a video of the whole thing. So you may also have seen, I hope you have seen on the Free Palestine TV Twitter, get it while you can, because they translated, Hezbollah made episode 2 of their target bank video. So they have this so-called Hoopoe Bird video, and they're showing they do it like a real TV show. They have previously, in a previous episode, they show, and then they show this one is on the Golan Heights and all the targets they have acquired in the Syrian Golan Heights, which is occupied by Israel. And they go through and they show headquarters, Iron Dome batteries, military industrial complexes, storage facilities, all the things that Nasrallah said that they would target in the event of a war, and now they're showing them in great detail. The Israelis have made various dismissive statements about it, but I think we can probably make a transition to Nasrallah's speech today. So I said in a previous sit rep that I didn't think we would hear from Nasrallah again because I thought the Israeli invasion of Lebanon was imminent. And I still think that it's going to happen. And I think it's going to happen. Let me explain once again why I think it's going to happen in spite of Israel's military unpreparedness for Hezbollah, their inability to win a war with Hezbollah, and all of the destruction that will certainly happen to Israel in the event of a expanded war with Hezbollah. I still think Israel's going to do it because if Israel doesn't do it, they are going to have to meet Hamas's demands in Gaza. And that's what Nasrallah said in his speech today. He reiterated this in various ways that I'll get into in a minute. And and if they're not going to meet Hamas's demands in Gaza, they're going to have to accept and sell to the Israeli public, the genocidal Israeli public, the idea that Israel's now smaller and the settlers that were in the north of Israel are not going to be able to go back. That's an impossible sell to a public that believes in their supremacy and has complete contempt for all of their neighbors and their abilities. And so they're not going to be able to accept that the future is not determined solely by what they want. So that's why I still think it's going to happen. But more important than me, Nasrallah spoke today, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. And he had I thought it was an important speech. He made the speech because of the two commanders that have been killed recently by Israel. And the two commanders both were killed in a relatively short amount of time. And Nasrallah wanted to make a speech. He said, I wish I could make a speech for every single martyr. He said this at the beginning. He said, I wish I could make a speech for every single martyr that falls, but I can't. And I wish I could visit all of their families, but for security reasons and a lot of other reasons, I can't do that. But I do have an obligation to speak about commanders that have died. And so he explains that that's why he's making this speech today. But of course, whenever he makes a speech about martyrs, he also gives a picture of where the resistance understands the military situation to be. So first he talks about the careers of the commanders, and some of the stories that he tells are amazing. These commanders both started their careers in the 80s. They fought on the front with Israel for decades. Then during the Syria war, during the Iraq war against ISIS, they fought in both of those theaters against first US backed kind of Al Qaeda regime change in Syria, and then the Islamic State, also the US backed regime change forces in Iraq. And he talks about how the late Iranian general Qasem Soleimani once came late at night to Lebanon and told Nasrallah that he needs 120 field commanders to go and lead the battle against the Islamic State in Iraq. And Nasrallah, I mean, he said he couldn't do it all in one night. They did it over 2 days, he said, but they had to send them. And these two commanders who were martyred, they they were among those people. Hajj Abu Naima, I think is how they call him. So he also tells some other amazing stories. He talked about some. He said to those who, as kind of a response to those who were saying that Hezbollah was going to have trouble finding soldiers or fighters. He said he talked about a family of where there were four brothers and two of them had died on the front line, and in response, Nasrallah had, or not Nasrallah, but the resistance had moved the other two to rear area where it was safer, and the younger brothers, or the still living brothers, said, no, we want to be back on the front, we want to be back on the front line. So they requested to be returned to the front line, and he had talked to their mother and everything. So he said, this is the kind of these are the kind of people that are in the resistance, and these are the kind of this is the reason why we're going to win. He, in his assessment, he says that the Israelis once talked about destroying Hezbollah, but now their language has changed. Now they're talking about we need to get them to move back from the front, either through a deal or through a limited operation. And the question of how they're going to limit it and what the nature of such an operation would be, he raises that as a question. he he also says some of these are low probabilities, but we still have to be very cautious. He talked about, okay, there's a few other notes that I have here. He reiterates how Hezbollah's front is a support front. Yeah, this is a key point. He reiterates how Hezbollah opened the front as a support front. They didn't give it a separate name. The name for their operation is called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. They don't have a different name because they want to emphasize that the name of the operation is the name that Hamas gave it. And he talked about how the front is pressuring the Israelis by destroying the equipment. They have to maintain a physical presence. By maintaining a physical presence there, they have to accept constant casualties. He talked about how there are Hezbollah units that are just watching and waiting for Israeli tanks to come out of hiding. And as soon as they come out of hiding, they get hit and destroyed by their anti-tank missiles. He said they are he talked about the Rafa operation and how it's a failure. He thinks Netanyahu made a kind of a slip when he said, if those who want us to leave Rafa now want us to fail. And he said, okay, that means they're admitting that they've not had any victory or success so far. He kind of talked about distance and space, and how if the Israelis can't deal with 27 square kilometers of Rafah, the size of southern Lebanon is vast by comparison, and how are they gonna have any success there? He speaks directly to the war minister. He says, when your tanks appear on our borders, you know what awaits them. Uh, he talks about how the resistance would want a ceasefire. He reiterates that. He says all of the resistance wants a ceasefire. We want well-being. We want everyone. We want peace. We are the people of war and resistance, but we want peace, and we will not refuse it. But the key, I think, the real key thing that he said, I thought was really remarkable, was he said, um, don't ask us what we think of this or that peace proposal or ceasefire proposal. He said, we accept whatever Hamas accepts, and we refuse whatever Hamas refuses. We don't have an independent stance on a ceasefire. If Hamas accepts the ceasefire, we will stop firing without any discussion. He used that phrase again that the deputy secretary used. He said, if there's a ceasefire tomorrow, Hezbollah will stop their front without any discussion. But then he said, if Israel's been talking about trying to get a deal in Gaza so they can go and attack Lebanon, and he said, we entered this war to defend Gaza. We have a bigger responsibility to defend Lebanon. So they're not gonna do a unilateral ceasefire if Israel is invading Lebanon, but they would do a they have completely linked their ceasefire on their front to a Gaza ceasefire that Hamas accepts. It just historically it kind of it's kind of amazing because I was, a young teenager during the first round of the Iraq War, 1990, 91, and Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and they were trying to negotiate. He was trying to negotiate a way out of Kuwait, and what he did was there was this phrase, and Chomsky wrote about it a fair bit, called linkage. So Saddam Hussein wanted to do linkage, and the Americans refused linkage. And so the linkage that Saddam Hussein wanted to do was he wanted to say, okay, we'll withdraw, Iraq will withdraw from Kuwait if Israel withdraws from the West Bank and Gaza. So he was trying to link withdrawal for withdrawal. And of course, the Americans said, no, there's not going to be any linkage. We're going to do a military solution. We're going to attack Iraq and destroy its army. Uh, and that's what they did. And then they imposed sanctions, and then they re-invaded Iraq in 2003 and did the regime change. And now here we are today. And it's just fascinating because they did all this to avoid linkage with Israel 35 years ago. And now here we are with this war and this support front that Lebanon has opened back in not the 90, maybe a little bit before 1990, in late 70s, when Shazali was writing about the Arab military option. I did a sit rep about that book, The Arab Military Option by Commander Shazali. And he said something like, Lebanon will never amount to anything. It's too small, but the best we can hope for is that it won't be a place through which Israeli invasion of Syria comes. And now the Israelis are shaking and contemplating the idea of fighting a war with Lebanon, with this this group, this non-state group in Lebanon that has committed linkage, that has completely linked the ending of war on their border with Israel, what they call northern occupied Palestine, and Israel's war in Gaza, Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. So so that was Nasrallah's speech. It was a remarkable speech. I thought it was very strong. It was a very confident, and he talked about confidence. He said, "Why are we able to talk with such confidence?" He kind of addressed why resistance leaders were able to talk with such confidence despite facing an enemy with such capabilities, with the whole world at their disposal, as he put it. But yeah, he concluded with a congratulations to the new president in Iran, and he said, President Pezeshkian did not have to even respond to me, but he responded to me, and Iran supports the resistance, and they're going to continue to support the resistance. So that was the conclusion of Nasrallah's speech. Now, let's wrap up with another couple of reports from the fronts. In the West Bank, the 9, 10, maybe 20, 21,000 prisoners that Israel is holding, hostages, captives, whatever word you want to use. They use the word prisoners. The prison one of the Palestinian prisoner kind of committees notes that 670 of these 10 to 20,000 prisoners are children. So they're holding 670 children among these 10 to 20,000 captives that they're torturing and starving. Tulkarm, they're still storming Tulkarm, or they've done a multi-day Tulkarm raid. They're raiding Balata camp out of Nablus right now as I'm recording. They abducted a prisoner that they had previously freed in a prisoner exchange, and that seems to be what they're all about these days, going in and raiding and then taking prisoners that they've already freed and family members. Taking prisoners, taking Palestinians captive seems to be a major reason for Israel to exist. And speaking of which, it's interesting because Nasrallah also mentioned the Haredim, the religious Orthodox Israelis who are protesting against being drafted, and that the day that they actually get drafted is coming, and it's going to be a real confrontation because I mean, this is really important in the Jewish religion that the highest aspiration in Jewish religion is to be able to study the Bible full time, like to be a biblical scholar. Having people doing that is a part of their community, it's a part of their religion, and it's the highest purpose that someone of that religion can be. A lot of religions have that, being a religious scholar is the highest aspiration in that religion. And Judaism is like the religion that, originally had that before Islam and Christianity existed. Jewish religious scholars were doing their thing. And, one of the reasons that Israel says it exists, that Zionists say Israel exists, I should say, because Israel doesn't say anything. Israel's a thing. It's not a, but one of the reasons Zionists say Israel exists is to provide a place where Jewish scholars of religion can do their full-time religious scholarship, because that's the highest aspiration of Jewish people, and Israel is supposed to be the Jewish state. And now they're saying, actually, no, you're not going to be protected from military draft. Even if you're a religious scholar, you're going to have to go and kill children in Gaza, which I guess from the Zionist perspective today is now the highest aspiration and has replaced being a Bible scholar as the highest aspiration for people in Israel to have. So that's another major fracture. I think I've reported on it many times on this channel, but it's the deadline is approaching because the Supreme Court has affirmed the right of the government to do this. So watch that space for sure. And another point on prisoners, there were a couple of high profile Palestinian prisoners, Moath Amarne, who was shot in the eye, released after 9 months. He's a journalist. And Moaziz Abayat, who was tortured and starved. He was an athlete before. One of the prisoners who got out, he said, "Don't greet me. We don't know what infections we have," and they're not putting past the Israelis the idea of trying to infect masses of people by infecting prisoners with biological agents. So if you think that that's too depraved to contemplate, you probably haven't been watching this channel or paying attention to the way the Israelis have been behaving. Lastly, Yemen and Iraq, which we could probably report on together because they're doing so many joint attacks in terms of drones and missiles, etc. So they released reports saying they targeted a power station and Ashdod port, and the Yemenis also mentioned targeting several ships. So that war at sea and over standoff weapons with Yemen and Iraq, that war continues. So I'd say today and yesterday were Lebanon's days to speak. Nasrallah's speech and the Hoopoe Bird episode 2 were the major things I wanted to make sure I reported on, but there's plenty more, as I said, from Gaza. Unbelievable new videos and reports from Gaza, including that raid just out of Rafah. So no end in sight, indeed. New atrocities all the time, but the resistance continues to be strong and confident, I would say, as expressed in Nasrallah's speech today. So reasons enough, I suppose, to hang on, and we'll see you in the next one.